Hello everyone, and welcome to this video where we are going to take this catamaran that I developed with R.S.V. Right now it's configured to deploy an ROV, and we're going to be revamping it and turning it into a vessel that can catch crabs. So we're going to put crab pots in the back, we're going to change the configuration of the superstructure, maybe adjust the hull, and kind of see where all that gets us. Right now what I will say is that the fishing update with the crabbing is very detailed and intricate in a sense that it can get you to develop multiple different types of vessels, pretty much as simple or as complicated as you want. Like I showed in my other video, you can just drop the crab cages or crab pots down and catch them, or you can have crazy detailed systems with GPS and all kinds of stuff. But for this version, because it is such a small boat, what I'm thinking of doing, removing this from that rear deck here, making it open. By open I mean making this portion here just kind of have a hole into the water, and this is where we will deploy the crab pots, as well as have kind of an overhead gantry system. So that is the general basis. This crabbing boat that was developed by R.S.V, he did the hull as well as the designs of the actual crab pots. So I'm going to take some inspiration from this one. I will do some differences in a sense that it won't be like this with the crab pots hanging off the side. It will be in the center of the boat. Of course, this vessel that you see in front of you here, developed by R.S.V, for sure can catch more crabs and lobsters. Mine won't be as, you won't have as high of a return rate on the crabbing industry, but this is actually a crabbing vessel, whereas mine is going to be kind of a fisheries style vessel for doing exploring and seeing where the crabs are and that type of thing. But we're going to be utilizing some of these systems, including this gantry system. So back to the R.S.V Alston. Like I said, we are going to do some changes, and you can see them right now. I pushed forward the whole cab. Previously it was back here with a much larger forward deck. Now it's very front forward, and I placed the funnels kind of freestanding here and opened up this back portion, like I said, for the crab pots to drop down. Of course, you'll see that there is a bit of a difficulty. The crab pot itself is 5x5 width, so this works perfectly, except it can easily get snagged on the vessel itself. So I'm gonna have to increase the width of the ship, which is a-okay. This is quite a narrow ship, so increasing the width will be pretty easy. But something I'm even considering is possibly putting them in this direction. That will buy us a bit of space. You see that if you can drop things down like this, you actually can have it be deployed in this system. So that's something to keep in mind. But I do think, just for the sake of this vessel, to be able to catch a little bit more in order to catch more lobsters and crabs, I'm going to actually make this wider regardless. Okay, first test of this system. What I did is, in addition to making the ship wider, you could see that I haven't even painted the top yet. It still looks pretty cool, and it's just that much wider here. The bridge will have to redo some things. You can see that there's right now a hole. I haven't even done any of the interior. I did add a back door, but I reconfigured these crab pots to kind of go in this 2x4 sort of configuration. This allows up to 128 lobsters or crabs to be caught, because each one can contain 16 of them. So not a huge scale operation, but for this vessel, it's not huge, and that kind of is the purpose. It's more a research-based operation, in my opinion, than profit in collecting massive amounts. So I'm just going to roll ahead and go with this. Now what I do want to do is run a quick test on how this system works exactly. So right now you can see that the pots are kind of just hanging, so I will have to develop a system to keep them in place. But if we drop them down to the seafloor here, and that is why we're at this base. So once we drop it down to this, and I'm using composite cables, you'll notice, which can actually feed information to the top. So we're not going to roll with the ropes that we saw in R.S.V's boat, but rather we're going to have a smart system that uses, determines the number of lobsters. It'll determine the depth, it'll do all kinds of stuff, hopefully on a display. Anyways, now we go to bed, and we could sleep the night away while we catch some lobsters there. Now this whole thing is just proof of concept. I want to see if it'll work. I want to see if it'll fit through this hole. I want to see if we can actually get the lobsters and all that good stuff. Alright, clearly it worked. You can see that we have a lot of lobsters and crabs, and if you pick them up, and assuming there's a hopper here, you know, you can place it into the hopper and all that good stuff. So it seems to work in that kind of sense, which is perfect. The proof of concept is successful. I've just placed hoppers here. Now I do wish that they could be, you know, kind of attached, but because of the catamaran hulls, and short of putting them right here, which would kind of, I could, but I'd have to reduce the cabin size, which again could do. But not only that, I would have to also find a way for the crane to come and suck up and vacuum the hoppers from here. So I feel like just having it here and kind of moving back and forward, collecting it on this side, and here moving back and forward, collecting it on this side, will kind of keep the weight distribution even, and it'll work. Now, this system I tried and actually failed, because what's going to happen is this thing sticks up like this, and as soon as it gets to the bottom of the ship, of course, you'll never have it coming at perfectly the right angle, and it will get snagged either here or here. So we're going to have to think of a new system for this, which could look something like this. So I've actually revamped this whole thing, and in addition to it looking a little nicer now that it's not attached to the cabin, it's almost like its own kind of freestanding type of structure here, but it actually has the hardpoint connectors, which perfectly work with aligning this thing and locking it in place. So that seems to work quite nicely. I increased the size of the hoppers and kind of made this look like it's a cooler. Now we'll see if this is good in a practical sense, but of course this part here is supposed to serve kind of as like, in real life, the fishing boats would have like a table where you could sort and go through what you've caught. So we'll see if that works. Of course, again, with the vessel being orientated towards research rather than industry, I think that it does serve a pretty good purpose. Now, the one fun thing that I've done, and this came directly from Bison, Lord Bison, who is a moderator on my Discord server, suggested rebranding OMA to OMA F, and that will be the Fisheries Department of OMA. Now, with the cool new name comes a cool new logo, which is of course a little colored fish in the same colors, and you can see there's some paint job missing, but the idea is that this vessel will have a distinct paint job versus the other regular research vessels that OMA has, and it kind of goes in with the rest of the lore. That is the search and rescue, the SAR division, which uses kind of an orange base. This one just has that additional turquoise stripe, and that denotes that it is for the fisheries department. Now, if we unlock this, you could see, and assuming you do this, you can relock it. So that system seems to work pretty well there. And of course you can deploy and drop the pots. Now, one thing I actually noticed is that the position of the winch, while decent, it's not perfectly in line, right? It's kind of like that. So I feel like I could move the winch over one and have that hole dropping directly into that cable anchor. So little minor changes like that. But as I said, you'd pretty much pick up your lobster, put it in here, pick up your lobster, put it in here, and you can kind of do it from the whole place. One thing that I've been thinking about, instead of releasing it as a 2x8 lobster pots, maybe having 2 sets of winches and having the left and right side be separate, so that way you can actually have one lobster pot set down on the seafloor collecting, while the other one is up here being, you know, placed into the hopper, and then you can kind of switch. So I'll look into that. Obviously, the pots themselves may hit into each other and cause some other problems, whereas this is kind of a clean setup. But overall, I am liking how this is working. I'm wrapping up the separation of these two. You can see that I've added the various winches. I revamped this system, keeping the lights in the center, however, but now you can see there's 2 distinct bodies. One thing that I still have to figure out and kind of determine if I like or not is any of kind of the smart systems I'd like to place in this top bit here so the crab pots can make their way and sit on the sea floor. So it seems that I sort of have a working space of about 4 by 3, which may or may not be enough, but that'd be ideally where I put each of the smart microcontrollers, and then maybe have the depth meters and whatnot in this area here. But this would hopefully allow for smooth deployment and 2 separate lobster pot systems that, like I said, you can work on independently. Have one down there collecting the lobsters while the other one is at the surface being deposited into the hoppers. After my little fall into the moon pool, I'll try with railings to see if that works and prevents that type of thing. Again, the inside of the cabin will just have to wait, as well as the systems. But what I do want to do now is create the systems for the actual lobster pots. So we're going to delete those buttons. I think it makes much more sense now to have the buttons on this post, for example, and they could even be in the form of a control panel or instrument panel rather than the full-on just big buttons. This will just look a little cleaner in my opinion, and what we can do is we'll mirror it afterwards, but for this one right here we'll make it aimed down, and this will be the lower winch. Number 2 will be the raise winch, so we'll make sure it's up, and then we'll have the actual unlock, which will be a flip switch, and that will release the system. Now alternatively, maybe I don't want to do that, because if I just put none, and the action of putting the downward winch will also release these, so that way it just makes it that much more simple all over. Now one thing I did do is add in here a little breaker. This is specifically for our fishing system, and it's going to be coming out of the electronic system. So once I find the electronic systems here, that goes into this, and then B will go up to all of our fishing systems, just ensuring that if for some reason you do have to cut power to the fishing system, you can with relative ease. Because this operation can be during the day or night, I do think it's worthwhile to make a new set of lights, especially considering the fact that the catamaran is so wide. Our previous light here will no longer really illuminate the area sufficiently. So what I'm going to do is, of course, take its power and take its button so it stays attached and connected to the same button, and then even to make it the same color just so it's not really shining too brightly on anything. Now I do wonder if it's aimed. Oh, it is, and it is aimed in a purely downward direction, which pretty useful. So I will make these ones the exact same and just remove that. Now the camera itself can be here, that's fine. Alternatively, maybe the better place for this camera system is a little higher up, such as right here, just so it fully captures what's going on the deck if you have people kind of moving around. Of course there are some blind spots, but it is what it is. I think it'll capture the overall gist of the operation for whoever's inside the cabin. One idea I had for these winches is actually to use my anchor microcontroller, which you pretty much type in the type of anchor, you type in the distance the winches from the seabed, and you type in the distance of the actual seabed from the vessel, and if it exceeds whatever value this winch can deposit, which is 150 meters, so if the seabed is greater than 150 meters, this winch will not even deploy. That's how my anchors work. Some people have an issue and say, oh, the anchor is not deploying, but really it's only so it can make contact with the seafloor. So similar idea here, in fact, identical system here. So, and as you can see here, automatic anchor up, anchor down, and failed to deploy because it's too deep. And here it actually lists the depth. So I can actually go ahead and grab this exact same microcontroller. This may prove to be quite useful. Also, then you're not worried about the system constantly working. Now, I may have to make some retrofits because, as you'll see here inside the microcontroller, it actually talks to the to a magall that is on the anchor. Now, I have two choices here. I either could put a magall on the crab pots, or I can use a system that talks to the actual crab pots themselves and tells us if the crab pots are in fact on the seafloor, meaning if the anchor or if the winch cable length is equivalent to or greater than the seafloor depth, then we can assume that they're resting on the seafloor. So small changes, but I think a decent system. The simplest system is to use the exact same mechanic that we have already, and that would pretty much mean to have the magalls. So when the magall itself is connected, it sends a signal back up through the cable. So right now we're going to do it like that. However, if it works, then I may just leave it, because having a magall actually hold it down isn't the worst thing, especially if it's heavy seas. Granted, if it is heavy seas, it may cause our boat to sink if the waves are too high and all of a sudden your crab pot is holding your boat to the seafloor rather than letting it move up and down. But we'll see. I'm just curious because adding the magall there actually increases the height from which our seafloor is. So we'll see if this system works as a general before I start modifying the microcontroller. Okay, testing out the system. You can see it's making its way down and it stopped. Okay, that is exactly what we wanted. Now to bring it back up, it releases itself. And it should make its way back. Oh, into the holders. It does not. And that is something to do with the automatic microcontroller. I want it to stop at a height of 0.9. So I have to rejig that until it actually gets seated back into the hard point. But overall, it seems to be working. Now, whether it catches some fish or not, that's a different story, which I'll have to check independently. Okay, we'll see, first of all, if it gets seated in the hard point, and second of all, if we're able to catch anything. Up, up, up. Beautiful, that worked, and 10, 10, 10, 10. Now, is that because of the height, or is that because we didn't wait long enough? And now we got 16 everywhere. So it seemed we didn't wait long enough. Of course, now you can go ahead and take them into here. If you are playing with a friend, it may be a little easier and go a little faster, just because you can offload and unload more at a time. But again, the intention of this vessel is to be sort of manual rather than, you know, automatically loading. So here you are emptying out, and here we have 11. So this system seems to work. I can go ahead and mirror it to the other side. Again, I'm not 100% sure whether I want the magalls on the bottom or not, just for the sake of possibly sinking the ship, since it'll be holding on to the bottom. But, you know, maybe it'll serve as a benefit to hang on to the one spot so we don't accidentally end up drifting off course. So we'll see. In the long run, if it doesn't work, I'll go ahead and change it and adjust the microcontroller, but this does seem to be working. To give even more control to the rear deck, I went ahead and added some buttons here, including deck spotlights. So you can see deck lights, which will actually turn on a bunch of lights here, making it operation, you know, you could have an operation at night. There's moon pool lights, which are right there, and deck heaters, which are located here on either side. So if you are working in the Arctic, you can have this on and pretty much have a workable environment where you can proceed without freezing. So those are some of the things that I've done here. I do think I may have to reduce the level of this spotlight, for example, so it doesn't have that glare on the deck. And other than that, all the lights themselves have to be given this sort of glow that I have, the xenon kind of lights, or cool. Once that's all done, that rear deck system seems to be more or less functional. The only thing left now is the communication from the lobster pots back to the ship where it'll tell us the number of catch and all that good stuff. I decided after all I don't want to have the maggols on the lobster pots. I don't want the ship to be held in that location, nor do I want the ship to be held down and dragged down by the lobster pots. What we're going to do is use a threshold function, and we're going to use the winch length and the depth of the water. So those two factors are what's going to determine when the winch will stop releasing. What we're going to do is take the winch length, which is 8, and subtract it from the seabed depth. Now, one thing to consider is the winch itself is 5 meters from the seabed depth meter, which is on the bottom of the hull. So there's a 5 meter separation. So we could either account for that in this threshold, or we can actually have an add function which will say depth meter plus 5, and that's what we're going to subtract with the winch length, but we could just account for it. So what we're going to say here is if the difference of this and this is between 15 meters and, you know, whatever, 1,000 or million or whatever, then it's going to stop this winch from going down. So previously it was the function of the winch input, which would be the maggoll touching the ground, or us pressing the different number. That would stop it. So now we're just going to remove this winch input, and instead of that put this threshold function. Now I see that there is the winch input, meaning the maggoll connecting to something, going down here to this composite right, and then here to the instrument panel. Now I don't think we're using that. That's channel 6. So that's if I decide to have a channel 6, it'll be implemented on that, which is not even being used. So I could just go ahead and leave that. So I can remove the maggolls on the bottom, and if we try to deploy this system, yes, it will continue on, you'll see, but pretty much if we deploy it, it will drop down, and it's going to keep going down even after it touches the seafloor for an extra maybe 5 meters or so. Gives it a little bit of an extra play. Well, that gave it a substantial amount of extra play. But then again, that's going to ensure that the crab pot can stay on the seafloor even if we are moving up and down. If we are in very heavy seas, that would be okay with us here. And then, of course, we can bring it back up. And yes, it takes just a little bit extra time, but eventually it catches it and starts to yank it. And hopefully it goes back right into its housing here. So, there we go. I'm quite content with that. That's a nice looking system here. I did some aesthetics here. We painted this stuff, the structure, to kind of look a little more rugged and just kind of like steel. And then these crab pots I made orange, so they're just all kind of a uniform color. I do like the current system with the railing, so you don't fall into the moon pool here. As you can see, this should come back in nicely, and likewise here if we drop it. Oh, seems I didn't connect this side, so that's always good to do tests on both sides, especially if you are doing symmetrical systems. So over here you could see that, oh, they're not releasing, whereas here, as soon as you press winch down, it releases. On this side, when you press winch down, it does not release. So we can add that here to release and release. All right. That should get it working properly. I did remove the back here and kind of put this railing just so it looks a little more industrial. And now we'll get to that display. After a bit of programming here using Pony IDE, I ended up with a system that's pretty clear. Hopefully it'll fit on a display, and what you'll get is a reading that will tell you your pot's capacity and where you're at, and your hopper capacity and where you're at for both the starboard and port side. So this will kind of be a display that I could put on both sides of the pots, and I could put it inside the bridge itself, and that'll give us kind of an overall read of what we have inside the ship. Now, as for the actual programming of this, I'd highly recommend anyone to learn the Lua coding. I want to make a tutorial at some point, but it is a bit more complex and does take a little bit more brain power than the stuff I'm usually used to. but pretty much what I did is I took the one I used for my Alta mining rig and I just duplicated everything. So I have 4 lines of code for each one of these, as well as 4 of the inputs here, giving me kind of this calculation which fills out the rectangles inside the display here. Because I piggybacked off a microcontroller that had actual touchscreen capabilities, we don't need that anymore. What we will need is to add a bunch of different variables, including the inputs from channels 1 through 8. So we can start off here and have a channel count of 8. And as you can see, what this is going to pretty much rely on are several different factors. And if we hop into here, you'll see exactly what they are. So we have the hoppers and we have the pots. So this is the pot value and the pot total. Hopper value, hopper total. So that is sort of what this is going to do. Which brings us back here, where now I know I have to put a couple different things. So the first thing here, this hopper is actually wrong. What I'm going to write is the starboard pot. So that's going to go here, and we have to add a couple others as well. They're going to be number inputs, and they will be the starboard hoppers. So starboard pot and starboard hoppers. This video dump also I could turn off, because what we're not going to do is have a drill video or anything. It's just going to have the single video out, and we're not going to have the drill or the dump functions, so it's purely an informative system. So we have the starboard hopper, the starboard pot, and then we're going to need 2 more for the port side pot and the port hopper. So we're just going to go ahead and use this and make them, of course, into number functions of inputs. So that's only 4, not 8, keep in mind. But we're going to need the others, because if we drag all this out here, you'll see that I'm actually using a property number node. So we have the starboard pot here. We're going to need the starboard hopper to go here. We're going to need the port pot to go to this channel, and the port hopper to go to this channel. And then we're going to need these properties. So this is the starboard pot total, and that is going to now be a number we're going to define. We have 108. That's what we know. So we're going to put that there, and we know that the port side pot is also going to have that same number because it's the same size. So the port pot total is 108. So those are values we know. Now for the actual total of the hoppers, I'm going to have to find that out, but we can put them here as kind of a placeholder, and we can even call it port hopper and starboard hopper total. The total meaning that's the total number, it's not changing, whereas all these numbers here are actually variables and they change based on what number we have in the system. So as you can see, this all goes into our Lua script. Now we don't need the video switcher, so that means these channels are no longer even applicable, as the Lua doesn't have anything coming out of it, so we don't even need this. So it's pretty clear-cut if you know Lua coding. If you don't, this is still quite complex, but overall, this system should work and should get us that number we need. With the microcontroller here, I found out that the maximum capacity for the hoppers is 225. So now what I need to do is actually plug in the values into this. Now for the pots themselves, it'll have to go through composites, so it's going to require a little bit more action. But for the hoppers themselves, they're pretty straightforward and they're right here, so we can go ahead and plug those in. The port side is the left side, or this side, so we can take this and put it to the port hopper. And then the starboard hopper will be this one here. So that's sort of the starting bit. Now in here, like I said, we have a couple of different information nodes, including the composite data right here going into this winch. So this winch will now have information that this microcontroller needs. So what I might even do, just to save us some hassle, instead of having this be a number node, I can make it be a composite node plugged in directly to those hoppers and save us from having some extra microcontrollers. But even before I do that, I'm going to have to add a adding microcontroller here on the actual pots themselves, so we can ensure that that number is transmitted up to the deck. So I've just made a quick microcontroller. We're going to place it here rather than placing it on the outside, just so it's kind of hidden and in there. But pretty much what this does is links up to all the number nodes, so I can go and plug in all the fill levels of the pots, and once that's done, it'll give us the ability to select the channel and place it and send it through the winches. So what I'm going to do, you see here, this has a input, and we could send it through to the composite cable here. I'm using these winches as my main winches for both receiving the numbers and everything, so I'm just going to keep using those. So what I've done is taken the composite and placed them there, and now that that is there, the composite will actually be coming out of this winch. Now I do want the port side to be channel 1 and the starboard side to be channel 2, just because that is then going into these winches, which is going to be going into my microcontroller here for these numbers. So previously the pot was just a simple number function. We're going to now have to change it to a composite, and likewise the port pot will also be a composite. So with these changes, we have to pull in this microcontroller, and that will simply take this and convert it into this number, and likewise for this one, take this and convert it to this number. So we said for port we're going to use 1, and for starboard we're going to use 2, so that there should be working, and that is all the adjustments that this needs to get where we need, other than the fact that these winches now have to be plugged in properly. So we have the starboard pot, which is over there, and the port pot, which is right here. So those are the composites feeding into this channel. Now I want the monitors or the displays to kind of be in more of a prominent location, so something such as that, and that will be connected to that microcontroller. We'll have it on both sides so you can easily see where you're at for your pots as you're working, and we'll have one inside, but we don't need that right now. What we do need is to plug this display node into both of these displays, and not only that, but plug in these displays to the power, and lastly they will have to be powered on. Now that is something I haven't really thought about because we have this here, so I may just need to piggyback or use one of these lights rather than having lights to be the displays. I went ahead and added this key here that will turn on the crabbing system, so I left the top there, and I put a player sensor sphere. We'll see if that's in the right location, or maybe it should live somewhere more centralized. Probably up there, to be honest, because this is what's going to determine when the TVs are on. So if you're not within range, your TVs will not be on, and that is actually going to be quite helpful and to prevent the battery from draining. But now, rather than having the breaker down there, or at least in addition to having this breaker, we can have a relay. Now that relay will be triggered when you enable the function for the crabbing system. I will hide it up here just because it's not as, I don't want it to be there for visual purposes, but this will be enabled by this, and that relay will attach the power now to this breaker. So this breaker, instead of feeding directly into the electronic systems, it'll go from electronic systems into the relay and back to this breaker. And as long as everything is plugged into that system, which you can kind of see it is, short of these buttons that control the lights, so I don't want, no, even the light system, I want the key to be on before you can turn on and off the lights. So hopefully this now works. I added the display system, and you can see here it's hanging on both sides. Now when we enable this and deploy these pots, let them go to the bottom, and then we can make our way to bed, where we'll see what happens to the displays as we're resting. So there you have it. We've caught 28 of them so far. Now in this case, what you can do is you can actually retrieve one of the sides and leave the other one to keep collecting the crabs while you are putting these ones into the hopper. So as this makes its way up and locks in, you can start to fill up your inventory. And as you do that, you can see here, we've got ourselves a couple of these and place them into here. And of course, now the display says 5, now the number there. And it was working, the scale is just too small because we have 225. But now with 6, you could see that we do have some in there. So you can kind of keep this system going. I went ahead and placed the sensor there, and you could see if I'm standing in the middle, it's off, and as soon as I go here, it's on, and likewise for that side as well. Now, I did add the same button in here, so if you press crab catch display, it'll actually tell you where and what you've caught so far on your crab system. So that is in here. The next step, of course, is to complete the interior of the catamaran, but for the purposes of this video, I'm quite happy with what we've done here. Hopefully this will be out soon for you to enjoy. I want to thank you all for watching, for supporting my videos and my content. Stay tuned for more videos and content and creations. And as always, happy Stormworksing. See you next time.